The Genshin Impact 3.8 banners will feature all rerun characters, which is amazing for those saving for Fontaine, but if you aren't saving and want to pull for these returning characters, then I'll break down all promotional 5-star characters, explain their weaknesses, strengths, how to use them, and who you should prioritize getting. How's it going, everyone? This is Kay, and I hope you're all having an awesome day, so let's get started. First is Eula. Poor girl. She's been neglected until now. Her last banner was what, version 2.3 I believe? Nearly approaching 2 years. But all Eula fans rejoice, our queen has returned. She's regarded as the strongest physical DPS character in Genshin Impact. Her burst explosion can reach well over 200k with ease, a lot more depending on substats and supports. Eula is also very easy to use and is quite self-sufficient. All you really need is an electro character to help trigger superconduct, and preferably another cryo for energy. On top of her burst, Eula's normal attacks are quite strong, meaning she's someone who can deal decent damage consistently, while her skill has short cooldowns when tapped, giving you quick and consistent cryo applications. Basically, you should invest into all her talents. Which leads into some issues. She is a high investment character who absolutely needs her burst and normal attacks to be in high levels. Ideally, level 8 or 9, crowning them is even better. Eula's burst also has consistency issues as the explosion hits only once, meaning if the crit misses or worst case scenario, the boss enters an immune state or teleports far from her, that can result in the explosion missing. So because her crits can miss on her burst or miss entirely, Eula's normal attacks will be the consistent way she'll deal damage, so that's why you shouldn't neglect that talent. But her burst is the primary skill and can end fights quickly, meaning you should strive to access her burst every rotation if possible. Now, there is a delay between activating her burst and the explosion itself, so you can't control the timing of the attack, and it will depend on you reading the attack patterns of enemies. In a way, her burst will rely on multiple factors. If you can initiate the best possible combo for maximum damage, a little luck depending on what enemy or bosses will do, and who the enemy is, because if you're facing ruin guards or enemies with physical resistance, then she's not the best character to use. As a physical-focused DPS, Eula's team, as mentioned before, will typically consist of an Electro and another Cryo to help her with energy, therefore restricting some team flexibility. Above all else, Eula and her team is not reaction-focused, which can be limiting for some battles. There are some players, however, who uses Eula in Hyper Bloom teams, which can be very effective because she won't really interfere with Hyper Bloom reactions while you're able to add high physical damage on top. Her burst will increase in damage based on how many stacks she accumulates when attacking enemies after activation. There are several burst combos you can use, but the most standard one is E skill, which leads into burst, then normal attack 4 times, holder skill, then normal attack till her burst explodes. Of course, there are other variations that offer different effects, but the combo I mentioned should be the one you learn first. Mika is a support for Eula you can use. I have him at C0, so personally, I don't really use him often, and a lot of players would agree that if you don't have him at higher constellation levels, preferably C6, there are better options for supports. You can use him for his attack speed boost, but again, existing Eula teams are more than enough unless you have an open slot for him. Klee was the second 5-star limited character that was released in the game. You remember, right? During version 1.0 when we all still had fun with this game. I'm just joking. Well, half joking, but being such an old character, Klee is sometimes regarded as outdated. Now, this doesn't mean she's no longer effective. As a Pyro Catalyst user, Klee has constant access to Pyro damage just from using normal attacks. This is very helpful compared to, let's say, Yoimiya or Hu Tao, who relies on their E skill to infuse Pyro. Because of this, Klee can work well within Burgeon teams. If you like fire and want to burn down the world, one of her best teams is a Mono Pyro team. There are two things that makes her quite special. First is her ability to potentially stun lock and juggle enemies with her charge attack, which is her primary way to deal damage. Second is her phenomenal battery generation for the team, hence why she's so great in Mono Pyro. Her elemental skill can generate 4 pyro particles for each charge, and with her A4, every time her charge attack crits, all party members will gain 2 energy. As mentioned before, Klee's charge will be her primary form of attack. She's also fairly easy to build and has free-to-play weapon options, one of her best being the Wood Scythe. Now, Klee can feel a bit clunky or awkward to play sometimes. This is because she requires animation cancelling either through jump or dash cancel. Dashing with Klee, however, is usually not preferred since you will consume a lot of stamina really fast. Cause don't forget, her charge attack will also use up a lot of stamina. Her A1 passive, however, will help a bit as it gives a 50% chance of gaining an explosive spark when using her skill or normal attacks to deal damage. The spark is used on her next charge attack, which increases damage and consumes 0 stamina. Even with the passive, stamina management is still necessary. There are 2 combos you can use. One normal that leads into charge, then jump cancel. This will offer the highest damage and is the quickest way to break enemies' balance, but stamina will be consumed faster. The second combo is 2 normals, then charge attack. This will use less stamina and has higher A1 usage since you're normal attacking a lot more. Klee's Jumpty Dumpty has 2 charges and can deal multiple pyro damages that adds up to deal a decent amount of overall damage if it all hits. Now, it has a very long cooldown per charge being 20 seconds each. Also, using a second Dumpty will cause the mines from the first one to immediately explode. You can, however, use the first Dumpty for energy and save the second one during her combos. Her burst is a continuous attack for a duration as long as Klee is on the field. You can actually cancel her initial Jumpty Dumpty animation by performing her burst right after the throw. More about her stun lock and juggling. This is a great way to prevent enemies from moving or attacking you. Obviously, bigger enemies or bosses that can't be juggled in the air can still hit you. Klee's juggling is so great, she can actually knock heavier enemies into Venti's vortex, which is great for both characters. On top of being a bit uncomfortable to play, Klee is sadly outmatched by other characters like Hu Tao and Yoimiya if you are going for that pyro DPS. Vape teams are also not considered vital for Klee. It can work, but compared to the other 2, she's not as good as Hu Tao and Yoimiya for vape teams. Kokomi is a character that has risen to be one of the best units in the game. She is the best healer you can have and will practically make your team immortal, but her role isn't just limited to healing. With the clam set, she can deal decent amount of damage, and with Dendro reactions dominating right now, her being a strong on or off-field Hydro enabler adds further value. Kokomi's E skill is great for applying Hydro when she's off the field. Her A1 passive refreshes her E skill when using burst, which extends the skill's duration on field. That will allow the skill's cooldown to end in time for you to reapply it, providing you constant off-field Hydro. An issue comes when battles move away from the jellyfish's AoE. Using her burst to refresh it doesn't change its location, so you'll need to fight close to it until you can drop her skill again. As you know, she isn't a crit character, and that's a good thing since it allows greater stat flexibility as you can focus on HP and ER, even EM if necessary. Her burst is the most important talent, and you need to make sure she can access it every rotation or when necessary. Thankfully, Prototype Amber can help with ER, and it's free to play and craftable, meaning everyone will have access to this, especially at R5. Now, she can be splashed into any team as a general healer, but using her as a reaction enabler or driver is where she can really shine. Freeze teams, Taser, Hyper Bloom, Burgeon, and most effectively, Nilou Bloom teams can use Kokomi as she helps with reactions and heals, essentially providing 2 important gameplay mechanics. There are several artifact sets you can use. Clam set, as mentioned, can deal good damage for on-field Kokomi. Melolith is good for off-field support. Deepwood is an option to shred Dendro resistance, offering you other artifacts option for your Dendro characters. For Nilou Blooms, you can build her with EM if Kokomi is the intended driver, so Gilded or Flowers of Paradise can be used. Kokomi has become an excellent unit. Though we don't often face Rift Hounds or enemies that causes corrosion much, she is a unit that is best suited to handle those debuffs. During her burst states, the general best combo for her would be 3 normals then dash or 2 normals then dash. As always, there are many other different combinations that offer different benefits, but those would be the general combos you'll use. Scaramouche, also known as the Wanderer or whatever name you gave him, is amazing for open world travel. Not perfect for uphills, but my god is he helpful. I'd almost recommend him just for his fast flying. In terms of gameplay, as you may already know, his true potential is unlocked with a C6 Faruzan. Insane damage boost along with better energy and slight CC grouping, which benefits Scara immensely. Of course, not everyone will have a C6 Faruzan, but he is a phenomenal range character, often hitting enemies comparable to bow characters like Yoimiya. Scara is also decent against groups of enemies thanks to his charge attack having some AoE, but if enemies aren't really next to each other and more spread out, it becomes a hassle and battles may become slow, since he doesn't always have the best crowd control like other animo characters. His main kit will be his elemental skill, which has him enter a flight state. Upon activation, he'll have a certain amount of points, which I'll call KP for short. KPs will slowly decrease, and dashing or ascending will consume KPs faster, so generally, it's not wise to air dash or fly higher unless it's absolutely necessary, like to dodge or to adjust his height for attacking. Thankfully, his A4 will offer chances for him to gain an ability to dash once without consuming KPs, but it's still not enough to evade continuous attacks. Good news is that his charge attack will not consume regular stamina or KPs, allowing you to spam the skill till his flying state ends. It's a useful way to kill mobs of enemies real quick. It's also highly recommended you farm for the Desert Pavilion, as the increase in normal attack speed and the boost in normal charge and plunge attacks is just too good not to have. This can lead to you wasting time farming for the perfect artifacts for him, so take that into consideration before pulling. Because he's a fast attacking catalyst user, Scaramouche can trigger a lot of swirl reactions depending on your team. In regards to team members, he works well with off-field DPS units, specifically Pyro, Cryo, Electro, and Hydro. His A4 passive will offer different buffs according to which element he infuses with upon activating his E skill, which is why it's important to always trigger his E skill next to enemies instead of at a distance. Otherwise, you will lose out on dealing damage upon activation, similar to how you will activate Child's skill in front of enemies to deal damage. But for Scar's case, it's to gain his A1 buff, as enemies should be infused with an element. His A1 passive can also work if Scar already has an element on him, like Bennett's Burst, enemy attacks, environment, and so on. Briefly breaking down his A1 buffs, Hydro gives more KPs so he can fly a bit longer, Pyro increases attack, Cryo buffs crit rates, and Electro helps with energy. Speaking about energy, though the cost is low for his burst, you will need decent support if you wish to burst every rotation. Scaramouche has pretty high multipliers, so with the right support, he can hit really hard. Now his biggest weakness is his fragile state while flying. If you thought Yoimiya was bad, a damn rock will knock him down, resulting in loss of time and DPS. Since dodging frequently consumes KPs, even with his A4 helping him, having a shielder is highly recommended. So between these 4 returning characters, who should you pull for? These recommendations is typically for C0s, but just a heads up, my Scaramouche gameplay is C2, which is why his burst is a bit stronger. First priority, however, is definitely Kokomi. As mentioned, her natural playstyle fulfills 2 core mechanics in the game, a healer and an elemental infuser, working well on or off field. Very free to play friendly and can work in many scenarios, and the typical rule for gacha games is you want to go for good supports over DPS, not all the time, but generally. DPSs can get power crept in the future, but of course you have your standouts like Alhaitham and Hu Tao, but some of the best characters are supports in this game, or at the very least off-field DPS characters. Kazuha, Nahida, Zhongli, Yelan, and Kokomi falls into this category. While the other 3.8 characters requires teams to be built around them, Kokomi has way more team flexibility, not to mention she is the best healer in the game. Thanks to Dendro reactions, Kokomi has seen even more usage, especially in Abyss. You'll see her in Nilu Blooms, Hyper Blooms, and outside of Dendros, you still have your Ayaka Freeze teams, which is still one of the best. Out of all 4 characters, Kokomi can offer the most and is by far the best unit for all players. She has had some setbacks during her initial launch, but Kokomi has proven to be one of the top tier characters in Genshin, and take this with a grain of salt, but according to leaks, healers will play a bigger role in the upcoming Fontaine release. Next is Scaramouche. Now, he has a lot of problems and is certainly not regarded as an S tier character, but his ease of use combined with being effective against a lot of enemies and his flexibilities within different elemental teams, along with his amazing range attacks and speed, will benefit you a lot more compared to Eula and Klee. Klee, for example, doesn't have a specialized support that can basically triple her strength like Farazan for Scaramouche. Eula does have Mika, but there are several enemies that has physical resistance, at least more so than enemies with animal resistance. Can you imagine fighting those rune drakes with Eula? I mean, that's just horrible. But Scaramouche can easily defeat airborne enemies. He also has better team flexibility. Obviously, a team needs to be built around him, such as your supporters, your shielders, your healers, whatever the case may be, but his ability to work with different elemental characters, especially off-field DPS characters, because he can swirl with them, gives him an advantage. Even if you have a C0 Farazan, Scar can still be very strong. Now, fighting multiple enemies that are spread out can be a problem, and he usually needs, like I mentioned before, a shielder to protect him from getting hit down. But Scaramouche has proven to be an amazing boss killer. Next would be Eula. Despite physical damage being less effective since we're in a more reaction focused meta, she is the best physical damage dealer you'll ever have, meaning there isn't any competitions within her field. Against enemies without physical resistance, she can deal insane amounts of damage. Eula, however, has a few issues when being her burst reliability, as there are several factors that will dictate how effective it can be. We finally have Klee, who's still usable, and surprisingly her usage rate went up during the 3.7 Abyss due to certain enemies, but her pyro competition is just way too big. Take away her adorableness, most players will use Hu Tao, Yoimiya, even Xiangling as pyro DPS characters. For Virgin teams, you have Thoma. Her dominance, however, in mono pyro teams can be very strong for players in situational fights. Well, whoever you choose, just remember to have fun. If you're playing for a tier list or you're in need of the most helpful unit out of the 3.8 banners, Kokomi 100%. But if you want Eula, for example, because she hasn't returned in nearly 2 years, then go for her. Outside Spiral Abyss Floor 12, most other content aren't really difficult, but let me know who you're pulling for. Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to my channel for future Genshin Impact videos. Good luck on your poses, everyone. Till next time.